Welcome back to the Fresh Arsenal Show Transfer Shorts. Before we get into the video, it'd be great if you could subscribe to the channel. We'll be doing more videos now as we are in January and approaching the end of the season, looking at the statistical comparison of current Arsenal players, but also players they're targeting in the market. So today we're back looking at a player that probably when I did these in the summer, we would have been laughed off at if we were linked to him. But with Arsenal sitting top of the league in January, Declan Rice is suddenly looking like a potentially acquirable target in the summer. He's a player who we, as a foregone conclusion, would join Chelsea. But obviously with Chelsea's current situation, they look very unlikely to make the Champions League. It's unlikely that Declan Rice is going to want to wait around for them to come back into the Champions League, given that he turns 24 next week. He's a player who obviously loves West Ham, but they're really languishing at the bottom of the table, potentially in a relegation fight this season. So he is likely to be looking to move this summer and move on. And there's a limited amount of clubs that could afford him and also integrate him into the team. And Arsenal obviously have a heavy reliance on Thomas Partey at the moment to play that holding midfield position. So firstly, we can see on this slide, obviously we know he's a central midfielder. He's valued at 17 by transfer marks. I think it would take more than that to get him from West Ham, even if they have a really bad season. Maybe if they get relegated, you might be able to get him for that. But they've sort of quoted north of 100 million a few times before. So I expect we're looking around that mark. And to say he turns 24 next week, already been capped 39 times for England and stands at 6'1", very physical presence on the pitch. So let's have a look at his strength first here. These stats are from fbref.com. We can see that in terms of passing, these are compared to other central midfielders. And of course, the higher the green bar, the better, the closer to 100 percentile that is. Declan Rice ranking in sort of the 80s and 90s for most of the passing, particularly pass completion rate is very high at over 90%, which is 95th percentile. His pass completion over the medium length distance is what's really impressive. It's actually 96.5%, which is higher than his short passing. So that medium length pass, which you could see working particularly well in this Arsenal system, is really strong. And long passing as well. He's capable of making a lot of switches per game. He completes 6.79 long passes, which is 90th percentile. So I'm sure the Arsenal wingers would like, a player, if we're going to have someone eventually succeed Partey in that role, a player who can switch the ball and put them in an instant would be very advantageous. And there's some fall down there in his more creative numbers, which we'll look at in the next slide. But want to point out that his passes into the final third is still really high, so 7.48. So tends to make the pass before the assist or before the key pass. And obviously playing in that holding midfield role, that's what he's more likely to do. On the left columns then, we can see as well a few of his defensive statistics, which are really strong. Interceptions really jumps out, 1.82 per game is 90th percentile. Ball recoveries, that's kind of what I think of when I think about Declan Rice, when I watch him play live. He's a player who often recovers the ball, 8.32 times per game. That's almost once every 10 minutes. 93rd percentile, really strong in that area. In terms of aerial duels, he's got a good success rate. 58% of his aerial duels he wins, which is 78th percentile compared to his peers in central midfield, but doesn't get involved in too many duels, it's worth noting. So he only wins on average 1.06 per game. That's probably a little bit of context around the players around him, the likes of Souček, or a centre-half very close to him in those situations, maybe will prioritise winning that first ball, and Rice's strength is ball recovery, so picking up the second ball, perhaps that's a tactical move. So in terms of some of his weaknesses then, it feels a little bit unfair to look at some of these, given he is a holding midfielder, and I think worth noting here that he's obviously played in a very defensive West Ham team, particularly this season. They've been really defensive, and the stats we're looking at are looking at the last 365 days. So it will be the back end of last season and the start of this season, which were particularly poor for West Ham, and they've sort of sunk into a much more defensive shape. So His goals, etc., aren't going to be high, but really that's not his game anyway. But worth noting that he only averages 1 shot per game, only averages a shot on target every 4 games. So whilst Partey's not particularly strong in scoring goals, we have seen him improve a lot in that area and contribute a few goals in the last year. So perhaps be a little bit of a drop off there. We touched on his shot creating actions. 2.58 per game is pretty strong, but his goal creating actions just 0.17. So I think there's a lot of context around the team he's in here, because I think he does have the skill set to do a little bit more damage moving up the pitch if he's in the right team and the right system. So now let's look at the direct comparison between the players. And we've got Thomas Partey and Declan Rice's radars here. And for those not familiar with radars, if everything was right at the edge of this radar, then they'd be the best player in the world. So what you're looking for is, particularly in the areas that are important for that position, you want it to be right near the edge. So Thomas Partey's in red and Declan Rice is in blue. And the first thing I observed when I got this chart from Statistical is they're quite similar shapes. You know, they fluctuate a little bit, but what it does tell me is they are fairly similar in style. Obviously, they're playing in the same league, in a similar position on the pitch, and they'll be fairly similar, but even their strengths and weaknesses are in, you know, quite similar positions. Pressures are quite low for both of them, but then we have, you know, the likes of tackles and passing percentage is really high, and turnovers, both of them sort of joint quite high on that. So stylistically, it appears on the surface here that they are fairly similar in how they approach the game. But interestingly, we've got a couple of areas where Thomas Partey comes out on top with the XG build-up. So that's how he's contributing to expected goals in the build-up for his team. Looking at the previous slides, maybe not a surprise there that we can see Partey's a bit stronger in that area. But again, we have got that context of playing in a stronger team. Equally for Declan Rice, he has a few advantages over Partey in this chart. So interceptions are higher. Again, that we can contextualize that a bit. Playing in a weaker team, maybe more opportunity to intercept the ball. Playing in his own half a little bit more. What is really promising, I think, in Declan Rice's chart is his deep progressions. And that is defined by StatsBomb as carries, passes, dribbles into the opponent's half. And I think that's where we see the potential of Rice potentially being able to convert a bit more of that deep progressions into XG build-up in a better system as he matures into a stronger, more rounded player as well. So he's definitely got some really strong strengths here. You know, his passing success rate higher than Partey's, probably take a little bit less risk with his passes. Something I've observed of Rice, you know, watching with the eye test is sometimes frustrates me, particularly for England, that he maybe takes the safer option a bit too much. But, you know, that is at expense of keeping the ball for the team, which maybe is what you want from that role. You want the player sitting in front of the back four to just be a reliable player who can hold the ball for the team. And as good as Partey is, we've seen in spells in games, he is capable of losing his focus a little bit and losing the ball and not keeping it quite as reliably as we would like. So he does drop a little bit below Rice in that area. So now some sort of side-by-side comparison. A few of these we've already talked about, but this is mainly focused on passing. And we can see actually Rice comes out on top in pretty much all the areas apart from the goal contributing actions. So I think Partey edges him there just because Arsenal get up the field a little bit more. But I think these stats do show that Rice really has the potential to do the Partey role and perhaps even do it a little bit better eventually. You know, really good pass completion rates across short and long. And we've already talked about how strong his medium pass completion rate was. He gets really involved in the games, you know, as much as Partey, which in a team like West Ham, we probably have a bit less possession than Arsenal. That's an impressive statistic. Obviously, there is the context that at West Ham, he probably is the player that they look for a lot, being probably their best player. Whereas Partey is maybe a little bit less involved for that reason. He's got a lot of good ball players around him. So it'd be interesting to see how that would translate if he moved to Arsenal. Now looking at a bit more of the defensive side of things, in this slide is a little bit more mixed between the two players. What I would just note again with the previous slide and also this one is how close most of these are. So we can see they're very similar in the way they play. You know, tackles 2.21 versus 2.28, very close, but just edged by Partey right now. Blocks, Rice is having quite a lot more, but I think that's probably again the context of playing in a more defensive team. Thomas Partey, interestingly, winning more aerial duels. Talked about how maybe Rice was not getting involved in as many as you would hope for that position earlier. In terms of dribbled past, really strong from Declan Rice. Only dribbled past every other game, basically on average. Partey is quite strong on that as well, but not quite. And percentage of dribblers tackled. Rice is really strong in those duels. Partey, we know, is really strong as well, but Rice does actually edge it. So what we've seen from the stats so far is Rice appears to be, definitely capable of playing this role and has similar strengths and weaknesses to Thomas Partey. Seems a good stylistic fit. What we've got to account for as well is Declan Rice's age. He's just about to turn 24. Thomas Partey is just about to turn 30. It is very possible that Rice will continue to improve given his age is approaching his prime. So what I've done here is use some radars from SofaScore. And in the blue, we've got Thomas Partey's radar. And in the green, we've got Declan Rice. So we can see on this, again, very similar shapes, but Thomas Partey a bit better. But what we're looking at here is January 2020 in this first one. So I just wanted to show how Declan Rice has progressed over the last few years, because on the radar on the right, we're looking at January 2023. So Thomas Partey has stayed pretty similar across all those areas, whereas Declan Rice has got stronger. He's grown in the tactical and the defensive side of the game. And what this shows is that potentially Rice's radars and attributes can continue to grow as he sort of approaches that prime age that Thomas Partey is currently in. So the verdict for me is that Declan Rice definitely appears to be a very good player. Not just looking at the stats, he's a player we know very well from watching the Premier League week in, week out. He's a player that perhaps we thought was unattainable previously, but one that Arsenal now, if we're going to remain in the upper echelons of this league, we need to be targeting. So he's going to cost a lot of money, but Arsenal probably need to focus on quality rather than quantity, especially in the summer. And he's a player that I think over the medium term can be the successor to Thomas Partey and help add vital depth to this Arsenal team. Thank you very much for watching the Fresh Arsenal Show Transfer Shorts. It'd be great if you could subscribe to the channel to help us grow and produce more of these. And please comment below if there's a specific player you'd like us to cover.